In early June, people would leave the small valley villages and travel up the hills into the uplands to the distant Shieling, a celebratory process which could take several days. This marked the beginning of summer and of the Shieling season. The construction of Shielings was modest. The huts were almost always single-room buildings with a small hearth inset into the wall. They were low and small, often dug into the ground, with no windows and tiny doors. The buildings were barely wide enough to accommodate the raised bed of heather and turf which the family slept on. What little storage space there was taken up with animal products which they used to pay rent. The farming families lived without luxury and relied heavily on the oral tradition and company of others for entertainment. Shieling life was hard in many ways, with long days of farming, butter churning, peat cutting, and more. However, many a cold night the larger Shieling could be found filled with farmers, all taking part in a traditional ceilidh, a night where the local storyteller would gather people and regale tales of ancient myth or recent history. These stories would often last all night and run into the next day's activities. After the Battle of Culloden, the British government could finally destroy the power of the Highlands. New landlords welcomed enterprising sheep farmers from the lowlands, who brought with them vast flocks, which needed vast space to graze. Landlords forced old farmers onto smaller and smaller lands until they were grouped in townships along the coast, or moved to the cities of the Central Belt. The Highlands and Islands had their population decimated. Shieling buildings collapsed and became derelict quickly. The social culture of Shielings was also lost, when people were separated from their land and their communities. It took less than half a century to completely destroy the Shieling and its culture.
I'm Dr. Sam Harrison, and I have been working in the outdoors with young people and families and such almost 20 years now. I guess I got excited about Sheelings because it's just a tradition that sort of was all about the young people getting up into the hills. It was kind of like an amazing metaphor for what I was trying to do.
The methods and ethos of Shieling building are being rediscovered by the Shieling Project, a residential camp in the Scottish Highlands, which runs programs that help young people and adults alike reconnect with traditional practices. The project teaches an appreciation of the natural environment, traditional crafts, and building techniques that mirror that of Shielings.
And it's kind of not so much like historical reenactment, but it more about the sort of what the Shieling was about in terms of like living in a wilder place, cooking food together, looking after the cattle. So we're not all dressing up in kilts and recreating the Shieling times, but I feel like we're recreating the spirit of them, in the sense that like at the Shieling, folk would be entertaining themselves with stories and songs. They'd be living pretty basically. They'd be up in the hills, It was a real time of celebration, and that fits together quite nicely with some sort of sustainability and future looking stuff. So we've kind of got one foot in that heritage and one foot in the future. We really wanted to get in depth, so it was always on my list of things to do, to actually do an archaeological dig, and we would like to do more. But in terms of the archaeology, we actually applied for some funding, and then put it out to tender to find an archaeological company that could work with us and do the dig and incorporate like volunteers and school visits and that kind of stuff. But yeah, so we focused on a couple of huts, or hut structures. We found a broken pot that was probably abandoned the last time the Shieling was occupied, which was really amazing. Because that's what's great about the archaeology. It gives you some really tangible answers to questions like how many people were up here, and when were they last here, and what was the ground cover like, and these kinds of questions. And the fact that they were built out of, in our area anyway, turf, which is a really fantastic structural medium. We've done a lot of turf building, mostly walls and roofs, around the Shieling project. So yeah, so that whole sense that construction was a sort of non-specialized, and sort of biodegradable process that was just sort of added to each year, that you harvested the turf, and then it mulched down, and which is a broader picture of Highland, vernacular building, in terms of like creel houses and thatch roofs that caught all the carbon, then were taken off and put back in the fields. And it's a really interesting approach to building in that sort of biodegradable sense, but it's also really accessible. I mean, I've had like tiny kids building with turf. It's really easy to do. So that sense that everybody was like, right, well, we're just building our Shieling hut up again after it fell down. I really wanted to get that, going for the whole project, and also, I think in terms of participation, like if someone's built something and someone's handed them a saw and said, on you go, and they look at you like, really? And you're like, yeah. So that's been a really wonderful part of the project.
The Highland Folk Museum in Newton Moor is home to one of the largest collections of heritage Highland buildings, including traditional farmhouses and two fully reconstructed shielings. By showing these buildings off to an international audience, the museum further brings light to these buildings and their culture, and makes Scots think about our own potential heritage, both architectural and social.
People have used bothies in Scotland for many years, since after about the First World War, I think. Um, and our founder was on a cycling trip to the Galloway area of Scotland. And he went into a bothy to stay the night, and there was an entry in the bothy book which said, why doesn't someone form an association of people who are interested in staying in bothies? Our founder decided, yeah, that's a great idea, called a meeting, and the association was started. And from that, in 1965, when they renovated their first building, we now have, 105 bothies in our care.
The bothy is an open building used as shelter, available to all hikers who can make their way to it. Many bothies come with their own stories, as they were usually farmhouses or even shielings before being refurbished into simple hikers' retreats. Thus, bothies are a great way to connect not only with nature and wilderness through hiking, but also with other people in architecture with its strong connection to the past.
Over the years, the MBA have surveyed hundreds of ruined buildings across Scotland, and so nowadays we really rely on the owners of those buildings contacting us and asking if we would be interested in renovating and maintaining their buildings for use as bothies. And we applied criteria such as remoteness, as well as the practicalities of of repairing the building. If it is too close to a public road or a settlement or something like that, then we're not interested. It's really got to be in a wilderness area or a remote area before we would take it on. It is all volunteers, except in the rare occasions when the work is such that we need a contractor. For example, last year we re-roofed Greg's hut bothy, which is near the top of Crossfell in the Pennines. We tried to renovate like for like, and that was the case with Greg's hut. The roof was solid Cumbrian stones, slabs which weighed a ton, almost literally, and there was no way volunteers could take the roof off and then put the slabs back. So we engaged contractors to do that. We are also interested in the history of the buildings. Maintenance organisers appointed to look after each and every bothy, and we often find that some of them research the history of the buildings. We've also put up history boards in the buildings so that visitors can read about the history. And there's also a bit of history on the website for the more interesting and different type of buildings. In most of the buildings were shepherds' houses or other land workers' houses. And it's we don't always research into them because it's much the same, but we do have a number of unique buildings. But there are lots of people who simply go to bothies for the love of spending a night in a bothy, in a very basic building, with an open fire, meeting new people who would happen to come along on the same night and spend the night there. So there's really two. Those, I think, are the two aspects that draw people to bothies: the practicality if they're doing something else in the outdoor area, and simply enjoying the bothy life. It can only be anecdotal because we don't know how many people are visiting a bothy at any time. But anecdotally, I would say that bothies are at least as popular and probably more so than they have ever been.
The Shieling created an important, unique culture and lifestyle amongst Highland farmers, one that was extinguished. However, the Shieling farming culture is beginning to be appreciated around Scotland again, and although it will never again be used for its intended purpose, and never seen again to its full extent, perhaps we can use it as a blueprint for the revival of simple, sustainable vernacular construction, and the revival of an authentic, communal social culture once more.